Welcome back to the Gutsiest Brands podcast, the show built around understanding the DNA of gutsy brands by talking to the world's most innovative brand leaders. At GutCheck, we make it our business to understand brands. And over the years, we've learned that gutsy brands have a lot of common factors. We've identified 4 primary criteria that help us measure a gutsy brand. We feature brands that are empathetic, pioneering, bold, and demonstrate the power of those that see opportunity where others force trade-offs. When we find a brand leader we think embodies gutsiness, we invite them to the show to explore what makes them so successful, what drives them every day, and to get their perspective on other gutsy brands out in the world. GutCheck CRO Jess Gaedeke, a former leader at Nielsen, had the chance to speak with Todd Kaplan, the CMO of PepsiCo. Todd leads the flagship brand Pepsi. Todd's impact on Pepsi has been vast. He oversees all brand creative, communications, and commercial execution across Pepsi, Diet Pepsi, and Pepsi Zero Sugar, as well as builds the long-term strategy and new product innovation for the brand. Wow, that's a big job. Todd's widely looked at as influential, snagging a spot as one of 2019's top 25 most innovative CMOs in the world and one of 2022's top 30 marketers on LinkedIn. In today's episode, Jess and Todd chat about Pepsi's empathetic strategy, the bold moves they have made with their initiatives, and why Todd believes you should never accept that something can't be done. And though Jess plays it pretty cool thanks to all her preparation, she was fangirling during this interview. Grab your favorite Pepsi beverage and listen to another episode of the Gutsiest Brands podcast. Todd Kaplan, I think you know how excited I've been for this conversation. I'm a big fan of your marketing mind, but also the EQ that you bring to the discipline. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Really, really excited.
So tell us a little bit about yourself for our listeners. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name is Todd Kaplan. I lead marketing for the Pepsi brand here in North America. Been at PepsiCo for like over 15 years now, a variety of different roles, rotating around everything from sports marketing to Mountain Dew to innovation to created new brands, new water brands, bubbly, sparkling water, life water, all sorts of fun stuff over the years. From Southern California originally, and now live out here in New York. So, I don't know how deep you want to go or where else you want to go with it.
That's a good foundational start because we're going to get into quite a bit of your time at PepsiCo. Okay. But first, I'd love to just ask you, what was your very first job as a kid?
No, my first paid job. It's funny. My first summer, I had a dual kind of thing. I was a towel boy at the pool at the waterfront Hilton in Huntington Beach. I grew up in Seal Beach. And so I would just sit there in like a straw hat and get all tan and watch everybody in their swimsuits giving them towels and hanging out, which was pretty awesome. But then I would also had an internship that summer trying to kind of learn about business at the same time. So that was my paid job, and I had an unpaid internship where I was just trying to figure stuff out. So I like that contrast, and I feel like that has been true to your career, and certainly you have one of the coolest jobs today that, again, we'll get into more detail. So I'd love to start with one of the characteristics that we really admire in gutsy brands is leading with empathy. And from a market standpoint, to us, that means that you have a genuine, passionate understanding of the human experience. And you really can show people that you get them, you can walk in their shoes and deliver these empathetic brand experiences. And I feel like you're someone that I would call an empathy activist. You have a strong point of view on this. So I'd love for you to talk to us about how the Pepsi brand purpose leads with empathy and why that's so important. Yeah, no, I think, at the end of the day, our job as marketers is to, I don't know how you can be a marketer and not be empathetic, because that is literally our job, is to better understand what's going on in our consumers' heads, hearts, lives, feelings, all of that stuff. So we can provide good services and things that help address what they're feeling, what they need, how to, connect all those dots. And so from a Pepsi standpoint, A few years ago when I came onto this business and we rebuilt the brand positioning, and it was all based on our consumers and a consumer insight. And one of the biggest misnomers at the time was Pepsi had typically been targeting the youth generation and the next generation and trying to be, younger and cooler and all of that stuff, which is great. But one of the real insights we looked at from a consumption standpoint was that if there's people who are drinking a lot of Pepsi, those people also switch categories, with our competitor and stuff. And it's easier to get them to drink one or two more Pepsis a month rather than somebody who's this new young kid who doesn't participate in the category to drink one. And so let's click into that consumer base and see who they are. And from a demographic standpoint, you could say like, okay, well, they skew older, they skew more Midwestern, they skew more this, that, the other. And you're like, is that your design target that you really want to go after? And he said, well, let's, to your point, empathetically peel at the onion a little bit and understand who these people are. And as you got into it, there was this shared mindset between our most loyal consumers around this idea of what we call unapologetic enjoyment. And it really stems from this insight that there is a shared mindset from people who over-index on drinking more Pepsi than others, but also it's a shared mindset around a lot of humans, where it's this moment where you want to prioritize your own enjoyment over everything else in that moment, even in the face of judgment or constraints. And so examples of that, to get less brand speaky are, they clap at the end of the movie, they dress in head to toe, sporting gear when they're in enemy territory. They'll go karaokeing. They'll, eat the piece of cheesecake for dessert when, you shouldn't, right? And so it's these little moments in life, and we all have them every day. And a lot of times you'll feel judged. You'll have self-judgment. Sometimes with like things like COVID, you'll feel constrained or you won't be able to. And it's like, you know what? F it. I'm just going to go for it and do what works for me and enjoy unapologetically. And so we've positioned the Pepsi brand, which has always been around enjoyment, right? Think of the joy of Pepsi, the joy of cola, and just these joyful occasions like being at a backyard barbecue or a baseball game, and taking it to this level of like, we want to stand for people who enjoy it unapologetically. And as a nice brand point of view for us, this really helped. Everything started from there, and it's kind of gone, from that in terms of how we've activated the brand. And it's really been a game changer as we've really turned this brand around back into growth from an equity and a business standpoint.
No, it's tremendous. And I love that North Star of unapologetic enjoyment. And you mentioned that during COVID, people felt some constraint. So I would like to talk about that a little bit. We've got some data. It's called GutCheck is our program, but it looks at economic and societal trends through the lens of the human experience. And one of the things that we've measured is how emotions are changing so rapidly. We had a May data set that showed some hope and excitement among people. And there's a little underlying fear, but really it was like a lot of positive emotion. Fast forward 2 months, in July, we're seeing waning optimism. We're seeing fear and frustration, become a bigger thing. So I'm curious from your point of view, how does your marketing messaging change, or should it change based on fluctuating emotions?
Yeah, I think it comes down to this idea of agility that I've always been preaching to the team, of making sure that we keep our ear to the ground on culture and be very culture first. We call it culture in versus brand out. And it's really this idea of as culture moves and changes, it doesn't mean you need to change what you do because of it. You're always going to be true to your brand point of view, which, as I just shared, is unapologetic enjoyment for a brand like Pepsi. So then the question is, as the world changes, how does that point of view manifest in the new cultural context created by the world, which, as we know, changes on a weekly basis, as we've seen over the last handful of years. And so as COVID happened, what started as, hey, just being judged for, dancing at a sporting event or doing whatever, you're judged by your peers, it's just judgment. Now this element of constraints comes in even more so, where you're locked in your home and you're doing all these other things. And so to that point, as the tea leaves started to change, even that moment you're talking about, I remember in the spring, just as the first wave of the pandemic was starting to get a creak of light, the vaccine was out there, people were starting to say, you know what, maybe we can get out there. We built this piece of work called The Mess We Miss, which really, illustrated and brought to life these moments that were normal pre-pandemic, but post-pandemic felt a little oof, people holding hands, in a tub of popcorn, people, at a concert with, all the sweat and beer flying around everywhere, and at a all-you-can-eat buffet, grabbing shrimp cocktail by the fistful openly, all these things that just seem like normal, human things now seemed a little different. But this concept of, man, that's the mess that we miss, that, yeah, life was a little messy, but let's get out and enjoy unapologetically and free ourselves from some of these constraints, obviously responsibly. It was just a nice way to do it. And so we always look at the kind of cultural context as we're doing everything as a marketer to make sure it resonates, because I think context is one of those things that not enough people really account for in their plans.
Mm-hmm. And when you say context, tell me more about what you mean by that. I think I know what you mean, but elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of those things. And a friend of mine, Gary Vaynerchuk, used to say, if content is king, context is God. Right. And it's this concept that and I believe wholeheartedly that idea where basically you spend all this time building a message, building an ad, building a campaign, something like that, but you spend very little time understanding how it's received on the other end. And especially today, where, hey, let's say you make an ad and it's on Facebook, it's on TV, it's on Instagram, it's on many different conduits at the same time. And if am I watching, this is one of the things on social media. Am I watching it with the sound off? Am I watching it in the context as I'm scrolling through my feed, looking for other things? Or am I trying to go deep and really get distracted and watch a 2-minute webisode on whatever, right? Am I watching it while I'm multitasking, doing something else, like when I'm scrolling through my phone on the couch? Or am I watching it really focused? And it's all different. That's just a very example of just the mediums are now mobile and moving and contextually relevant. And then you have the cultural macro landscape above it. So I'm in a place where we're at war, or where, there's racial strife, or there's a pandemic, or there's other things that are permeating that cultural context. So it's the same idea where when COVID happened, we had an ad up called That's What I Like, that was really about unapologetic enjoyment. It showed a guy dancing in a sports stadium at a sporting event unapologetically. It showed a guy dancing at an airport while he was working at the airport. And it showed a guy dancing in a subway. Again, all three places that culturally you don't want to be in once COVID hits. Those are the last three places you wanted to be. And so we had to pull them off the air and things like that. So I think that's where context really matters.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I love that. And I think that often that context can be forgotten. And I feel like in that context is where you truly understand the human experience. It's where you can truly understand how to make those connections and understand those gaps in the emotional experience. So completely agree. Context is God. So another aspect that we really like to talk about when it comes to gutsy brands is standing behind bold ideas, even if they're not well understood at the time. And when I think about NFTs and I think about Pepsi's role with NFTs, I feel like that fits that characteristic to a T. And from what I understand, you personally kind of got into NFTs and nerded out a little bit, and you brought a lot of the thinking to Pepsi in terms of how to go after that space. What does it take to build conviction for an idea that I'm sure so few people in your organization even understood at all? How do you do that?
It's hard. And frankly, I'm still doing it on that front. It's, a lot of people are still trying to understand and wrap their head around Web3. And it's not an area where I saw myself nerding out and doing that, but I just kind of went down the rabbit hole and got curious and started to see all this potential in the future. And I think that's one of the things I'd say I can often sometimes see some of the, or have ideas around, hey, wouldn't this be interesting to apply this in this way or that way? And can see the potential in how breakthrough some of these ideas could be, which then gets me saying, hey, I got to go run around the building and see how I can get these things done. And it's hard, especially when you're educating people on, well, what the hell is it? Why do I need this? There's a lot of risk. What do we do here? And how do we navigate it? And so it is a little bit of there's a lot of wiring. And that's something that I'd say any idea. I've always been somebody who I like to work in service of the idea, not have the idea just work in service of us or whatever, right? And so for the right ideas.
Sure.
And so for some of these things that I really think could be game changing, you got to story tell and explain to people what's the benefit, why is it helpful, what's the risk. You got to also be flexible with it, that you're not going to be able to do everything you want, and how to kind of dial things back and up and down. And so I've been running around educating a lot of folks here in the building, getting everyone excited, but also trying to move quickly on some of these things. And we got our Pepsi Mic Drop was our first NFT series that we got out there, which was very successful and was a free drop for fans. And we've done a couple more activations of that since, which have been great, and have a big roadmap now of where we're going and what we're planning and all of that, which is really exciting. But in the meantime, internally, we now have a huge corporate task force that's looking into Web3, figuring out how with other brands, how do we want to structure things? How do we educate our legal team, our finance team, all the different layers? And I think that's part of the battle. Is you need to figure out how to bring people along early and often, and educate them in a way where it's simple enough to understand, what the benefit is to the organization. And this isn't just some one-off random idea.
Sure. So what is that benefit to the organization? What are you hoping to accomplish in the building this community and tapping into it?
I think there's a lot of, the Web3, stuff is limitless. I think where a lot of it can go. I think it's, a lot of people are bringing like their Web2 kind of thinking into this space where they're like, I don't understand it. It's because this is the equivalent of inventing the internet, but just done differently, right? So it's like Web1 more than it's like Web2. But it, what it is it's really, I think the idea of brands being able to build one-to-one communities with consumers, but doing it in a secure way where privacy and controls and all the stuff that right now you hear about a lot of the Web2 companies who they run and they have all of the data, and it's kind of these castles where, oh, we have privacy and we won't give you, but now it's decentralized, right? So one-to-one, consumers have their anonymity, but you still have the data capture and all that, but you also have the ability to build community. You can build tokenization with that community. So through an NFT that can unlock experiences, whether they're real life utility, whether it's a metaverse experience, as that starts to take form. I also think it's fascinating thinking about our business, which is very tactile and real in-person products and stuff like that. How do you show up? You can't eat or drink anything in the metaverse
Yet.
right? And yet, right, yet. So, maybe we show up as a music brand as Pepsi, or maybe we do some other really interesting things. And so I think there's a whole bunch of stuff we can do to really disrupt our business, and from a brand building standpoint, and potentially generate revenue as well. There's a lot of revenue generating opportunities. You think of the smart contract and being able to, multiple, the licensing, the transaction at the end of the day of what percent, even in secondary sales and things like that. There's, you think of these storied, rich, iconic brands, there's a lot of opportunity on many fronts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole idea of branded content in this way is just really fascinating and so far reaching. How do you avoid what could be just a shiny object versus something that's real?
Yeah, I think that's frankly a lot of the stuff you're seeing right now is shiny objects in the space of, hey, we're having a thing in Roblox, or we're doing a thing over here in Fortnite, or whatever. It's like, it's cool. And yeah, you can chase a headline and you get out there first or early and people say, hey, here's the latest brand to do this and this. And it's cute, but it's you need a real sustainable behavior around it. And that's basically what we've been building right now, is trying to figure out what is going to be our always on approach in Web3. What is the overall, I think about back then, I'm talking about Web2 of like, I remember when Twitter and Facebook and all these places came out, is people didn't have social media managers for brands. People weren't making ads for these spaces. People were doing all that. And now that's like, hey, who's your community management person? Who's your person doing this and that? Like, it's all second nature. And I think it's getting that muscle smart enough to know, what do you want to build in-house? What do you want to outsource? How do you want to do that as an always on, is kind of what we're looking at.
Yeah. Well, no shortage of fun challenges for you, but I continue to watch what you're doing there. It's certainly gutsy. And speaking of gutsy moves, I mean, the Super Bowl halftime show, just quick shout out for the 2022 show. Holy smokes, that was phenomenal.
Thank you.
And the digital experience that was provided as part of that as well. So I'm curious, what's next for Pepsi engaging with the Super Bowl as such an influential cultural event that it will continue to be?
Yeah, we're longtime NFL sponsors. We just renewed our NFL agreement. We're going to be part of the NFL this season and beyond for many, many more years per our renewal. Super Bowl. Pepsi is historically the most associated brand with the Super Bowl. We actually found with consumers. We've had storied ads over the years from Cindy Crawford to you name it, and everything in between. The halftime show, the Pepsi Super Bowl halftime show, obviously we've had a 10-year run. This last year, we decided not to renew and to actually decide to kind of do something else that we're still kind of forming out what we want to do with that and where it'll be. But it's really, a great property and a great platform that we're going to continue to be a part of the Super Bowl in one shape or another. It's just a matter of what and when and how we want to go do it. But yeah, and it's a great event that the NFL puts on and everybody. So we want to be a part of it.
Do you annually take like a major vacation after the Super Bowl? Is like the Pepsi team just, oh my gosh, let's rest?
Yeah, there's usually it's spot on. There's typically a big vacation after Super Bowl where it's just like, all right, everybody shut down, you're done for the week. And then similarly, sometimes we have these big meetings over the summer, this thing called AOP, which is like a big annual operating plan where we sell in our whole plans for the next year. And it's a lot of work getting all that. And then it's just like, take a little bit. I'm actually going on vacation soon as well, which will be nice. So.
Good for you. You deserve that. It feels like you do a lot of sprints, which is probably part of the method, but also probably feels a little mad sometimes.
It's a little bit of both because it's like you want to be culturally relevant and contextually relevant for all the stuff we just talked about in Agile, which does require being, hey, an idea came up last week and we want to launch it next week. Go, go, go. Let's figure this out quickly. Versus traditionally, it's like, yeah, you got, hey, here's our plan for briefing, the plan for next summer. And you have round 1 and 2 and 3, and then you produce. And we have longer lead projects too, to be clear, but there's some things that it just kind of depends on what we want to go on.
Yeah. Well, and that dovetails to where I'd like to go next, which is you as a leader, which I observe from the outside and some working with you, but just truly authentic and really intentional, which I appreciate. And one of the things that we talk about when it comes to gutsy leaders is this power of and that's seeing opportunities where others might force trade-offs. And I've heard that the words "that can't be done" have a little bit of an effect on you. I think that's something that makes your skin crawl from what I heard. So, how do you lead in what could be a highly bureaucratic environment? How do you make the bold moves you do?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. It's funny. And I hear that can't be done quite often, especially in a big company, like you said. And it's almost like, Marty McFly, when he hears the words like, what are you, chicken? And then he like, it's like not like it's a trigger word for me, but and again, I'm very like cool and calm with it all, but it's one of those just like, I lean in a little more and I'm like, oh, really? Because like creatively, there's always a way to figure it out. It's a matter of, are you willing to make the trade-offs? Do you have the resources? Can you figure it out? Can you get it done in time? All the other constraints that usually eliminate it. But creatively, if you think about things, anything can really be done if we wanted to. And so, the question is, we walk around here a lot, and I always say this idea of take no as a request for more information, and how you, are dealing with our legal team, you're dealing with our finance team, our R&D team. These are all great people doing great work, doing their jobs, trying to advise on how to best mitigate risk or do something with the right quality control or do something the right way that might not always line up with the time frame or the creative idea or whatever. If you have a really cool idea, but then you got to put 2 paragraphs of legal copy right underneath it on the front of the thing, like it might not hit the same. Right. And so as a marketer, you're always going back and forth, trying to make decisions for the right idea, but that also de-risk, the enterprise, because we are part of a massive, $70+ billion company that is often a target for lawsuits and things like that. We got to be very careful.
Yeah. So what are some of the characteristics of your leadership that allows you to really make headway?
There definitely is a degree of persistence. I can be annoying as all hell, and just even when things get killed, I kind of keep them in my pocket. And like, I'm still going to bring it back at a later date and try and find the right way to package and resurface this. So, there's a little bit of persistence. There's a little bit of, I'd say this entrepreneurial knack. I started a couple of businesses when I was in college. I'm very entrepreneurial natured, very scrappy, like to kind of make it all happen on the spot. And so the idea of bringing people together and saying, hey, what if we did this? What do you think about that? And all that. And then I'd say the other one is probably around, storytelling and communications. I teach a class here every year with our interns. It's about storytelling and about how to tell an effective story and through PowerPoint and all this kind of stuff. And I think there's just a lot of just simple human truths around how you package stuff and how you present stuff to different audiences to make sure they can connect with and understand and relate to the material and understand where you're going, so that they want to get on the same side as you and help you achieve it. So I think those are some of the ones I'd flag.
They're so important, especially storytelling, to bring people along. And you mentioned it earlier that if you bring people along early and often, and you keep them as part of that story, it probably helps build your case as well. So, and the other part that I was reflecting on with the power of and is just your job. I feel like you have the most badass combination of jobs. You're CMO of the Pepsi brand, which is kind of a big deal, which means you got to manage the business side of things with precision. But then you get to, collaborate with Snoop Dogg and these crazy influential artists, and you're doing all this cool. I mean, how do you actually create or earn, I'll use the word earn, a job like that?
Not easy. I mean, I've been around here for a while, like I said, and I feel like, you show you can drive the business and you can inspire a large organization, and you have a bit of a cultural sensitivity and all this stuff, but it's all, listen, there are days where I don't, even believe that some of it as well. It's a very fun job where it's very dynamic too. And I think, as you mentioned, it's funny. A lot of people in the marketing community, they just think, oh, you're just making cool ads or doing some music stuff. It's like, we're driving the business on this brand, right? I am talking to Walmart and Kroger and Dollar General, in a bunch of meetings. We have our divisions that we work through to kind of get all of our supply right and figure out how we're showing up locally in the different markets. Ran our scorecards and brand analytics. So we have a business to run at the end of the day here. That marketing is really the driving force of on this brand, but it's a very broad thing, all the way to innovation, new product development, and things like that we do. We making a lot of new products and innovations. So lots going on.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about innovation, because
Sure.
some might think of the PepsiCo and say, hey, they must, launch a bunch of new brands. And it's actually a really big deal to create a new brand. You were, one of the people responsible for Bubbly. So talk about what that experience was like at PepsiCo, and also, why is Bubbly so important to the portfolio?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I remember when I came on, my job prior to running Pepsi was leading our water portfolio. And at the time, the water category, like it's still going today, was growing gangbusters. And all we really had in the category was Aquafina, which is a great quality, mainstream water. Still is today, was the number one mainstream water and doing great. But you looked at sparkling water, you looked at alkaline water, premium water, coconut water, everything growing. And the question is, hey, take this job, Todd, what should we do? And everyone in the organization had a different point of view, from, hey, buy this company. Hey, start this. Hey, stretch Aquafina's brand over to here. Hey, do that. And of course, there's a million different opinions. Like, we just started this conversation around empathy. So step number one for me is like, okay, I'm listening to all the stakeholders. What do we got? Okay, here's where the lay of the land is. I'd say, well, why don't we start with the consumer? And what I really learned is that the way that the business looks at water is very different than the way that people look at water, if that makes sense. And the business looked at it through, we have a lot of these companies like IRI and third-party data folks who classify based on the product attributes. So it'll say like enhanced water, for example, versus still water, right? And that's how they have it cut. And by that kind of definition, smart water, which was Coke's premium water, because it has electrolytes in it, is an enhanced water.
Mm-hmm.
Another enhanced water is like Sobe or something like that, that is a colored, flavored water, which is very different from that. And I'm like, I don't think consumers see those products the same way. Like, that's weird that we bucket it like that. And so, consumers would say that's premium water, or that's, flavored water or something. And so we basically did our own segmentation and tried to say, well, why do people drink water? And it turns out there was 5 core reasons why people drink water, and need states and things that would map to each of them. And then we'd lay out our portfolio and say, okay, we have Aquafina for this one, but we don't meet this need state here, which was going to be met by sparkling water. We don't meet this need state here, which is where premium water really addresses it, et cetera, et cetera. And so in the first year, we, created this brand called Life Water, which is a premium water that the real insight, starting with the consumer lens, is that you have these 1 liter bottles that you carry around with you to meetings and in your purse and in your backpack. And it almost acts as a badge or an accessory. Reading the packaging is almost more important than what's on the inside of the bottle. They're both important. So I said, what if we put art on the outside of the bottles, and we use it as a platform to support emerging artists? It's a purpose-driven brand, and we change it every so often. And so we created Life Water, and it became the biggest launch in our company's history at the time. And then we said the next year, let's create another new brand in sparkling water. And the insight was really around this notion that people were essentially looking for the fun of a soda with the permissibility of a water. And when you looked at all the stuff in the sparkling water space, it was about purity and blue and made with all this kind of, natural, stuff, good for you, but it didn't feel fun. And that's frankly what LaCroix almost accidentally fell into, with just some quirky, weird packaging that looked a little retro, was adopted as such. But, LaCroix had been around for 30 years before that and hadn't really done a lot with it. And so we said, hey, I think we can build a better mousetrap. So we found this insight with the core audience, the millennial target that was really drinking in this category, that adulting is hard. And there's these little moments of playfulness they want to have in their life. So whether it's sending each other a GIF or a text or a fun little moment makes you smile. And so we built this brand called Bubbly Sparkling Water, that everything from the packaging and the logo and the brand experience on up, from the little U is the smile and bubbly, and the little face on the side, and the little tab that says hi-oh and hey you, and fun little things, and these bright, bold colors, these really broad, rich flavors, launched it in a big way, had a lot of fun with it. And and that right now is, we hope that it was one of our next $1 billion brands when it's all said and done, and it's been doing great.
I'm sure you still keep tabs on that. I'm sure you watch it
do.
carefully.
I do.
Yeah. Well, the whole topic of innovation, I feel like could be a whole nother separate conversation. But one thing I will ask your point of view on is, a lot of companies, especially CPG, right now are saying, hey, given the economic uncertainty, given what's going on with inflation, now is not the time for us to innovate. How do you feel about that point of view?
I feel the opposite of that point of view. I think the more there's constraints, the more there should be creativity. And so creativity almost works the same way as a diamond, that the narrower and the tougher things are, I think it fuels creativity. Look at the pandemic. There's some companies that just shut down and said, I don't know where to go. There are others that became a catalyst for just creativity and stuff coming out, and really interesting stuff, because you're like, oh my gosh, the rules have now changed. Now I can't go to the store. I can't, do this in public. I can't do this. I can't do that. Creativity requires a lot of, what I call creative tension to make things work. And so innovation, to your point, innovation is all about serving consumer needs or unmet consumer needs. And so if things are all working perfectly well, the needs are probably primarily being met, which is a tougher space to innovate in, because you have to find and extract those needs, or do a better version of meeting the needs than somebody who's in the place. If things are tough, guess what? Some needs aren't being met. Everything's too expensive in a recession. I can't get this kind of product access. Supply chain issues are preventing me from getting that, whatever the thing is. So there's needs that need to be met, which means if you have the right idea and innovation, you can you can get after it.
I totally agree. And I think that, the word that we use is friction. There's friction right now. People aren't having the experiences they want, and they're expecting a lot from brands. And I see that as an opportunity versus a time to be conservative and sit back. And I also think it's when you actually can form those emotional connections. Because people really need brands in their lives right now. And I would also offer, this is just my opinion, but I feel like the things we remember are emotional, right? Those are the things that become memorable. So I'm more likely to be loyal to a brand that meets me where I am in a moment of high emotion. And so I think I'm with you. So at least Todd and Jess agree on this one. Like, now's the time to innovate. You have to be bold, but
Totally
now's
agree.
the time. Yep.
Yeah.
Very cool. So with the potential recession, and large portion of the population is telling us in our data that if inflation continues to rise, 60% will buy more private label. How does a brand like Pepsi keep its loyalty and market share during these types of economic downtimes?
I mean, it's hard, right? At the end of the day, it's real in terms of recession, in terms of, what, spending power that people have and all of that. But what I would say is also, this is why you build brands. This is the power of what a brand does versus a commodity, right? At the end of the day, commodities, if get it wherever it's cheapest, it's a commodity. There's a reason why you bought those sneakers, why you bought that computer, that car. And it's trickier. It's harder to differentiate in a low involvement category like a beverage, where it costs, $1.79 or whatever, as opposed to a $30,000 car or something like that, and differentiate with attributes. And we have the electric sunroof and the run-on, electricity, or whatever the differentiators are, to do it at scale. And because you also are probably already low down on your price point, where you have to get a certain margin and all of that to keep the business afloat too, to keep everything going. So that is where I would say the power of brand building and the power of brand loyalty and where and how you connect with consumers matters even more. Private label will always be there, offering the cheapest paper towel, the cheapest cream cheese, the cheapest beverage, the cheapest whatever. That's what private label is, and it serves a role, absolutely. It also, many times, the product experience is not as good because they're focused on value engineering more than anything else. It won't be as good of a product experience on a number of attributes, and it doesn't really have the same affinity in terms of brand connection points. Again, if you're doing a good job as a brand builder on what that means, what that says about you when you're drinking it in public, what it says to yourself, how you feel when you buy it, when you hold it. So all those things matter, and that's where I would say, a lot of people go to a recession and will cut. I also think it's one of the times where you should actually lean in more to brand building, because it's such a differentiator, that it'll help kind of drive that wedge and show people what the value is of why your brand matters.
Amen. I feel like that was just a syllabus for a branding course, what you just said. So we'll make sure
to. I don't know about that, but we'll see.
So Pepsi always has cool stuff cooking. So what are some of the recent or upcoming initiatives that you think are really bold?
Oh yeah, we always have stuff going on, as you know, and it's funny versus a lot of other brands in the building where we have just pulses all year long and things that are always going on. And so obviously football season underway, and there's going to be a lot of fun stuff going on there. We're planning all of next year, some really, really big plans. We just had that AOP process internally to go through our plans for next year and have some really, really exciting big programming that we'll do on some of our core business and some of our zero sugar business. Some really exciting new news that I'm not able to share about, on the brand as well. But we have a lot of fun stuff. Don't just know we also do some of the fun little culture things as well. These things they call culture bombs, and so we always have a couple tricks up our sleeve. So
yeah, for sure. And I know the Better with Pepsi campaign got a lot of attention, and rightfully so. What was the impetus of that?
Yeah, no, it's a great call out. So it starts again with everything that we do starts with there's a strategic need, but also a cultural truth or insight. And strategically, just so you know where our brand sits versus our competitor, there's this thing we call situational salience, which is about what are the situations when I want to desire a Pepsi and where that is. And right now, we had a very big gap relative to our competitor in that space, given as you think of meal time and going with food, our competitor has far more deeper presence in food service, in restaurants and things like that than we do from over the years and things like that. And so we really want to close that gap and drive association and remind people that, hey, you have a choice when it comes to your beverage. And just because you go in a restaurant and see something there doesn't mean you have to drink that. And especially now with delivery and all the different stuff and people eating more at home. And we said, hey, there's a real opportunity to remind people. And so, there was this cultural truth around, first is I should say a product truth about our brand that, the taste of Pepsi goes quite well with food. And there are certain foods where it really, really complements perfectly. And so hamburgers, when you think of the taste of a Pepsi and the citric acid brings out the flavor of the cheese and the cheeseburger and how it cuts the grease, the carbonation, it actually, tastes quite well with burgers. And, but there's this cultural truth happening at the same time where the most popular burger chains don't pour Pepsi, they pour our competitor. And you're like, what the hell is that all about? And so I asked our team to do some research and say, hey, let's put this to the test and say, hey, do we have a taste advantage? We found out that we had some preference over our competitor with burgers. And we built this really fun, creative execution where we were able to find the Pepsi logo hidden within the wrappers of McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's, very cleverly done. And this beautiful work from our creative partners, Alma, that really brought it to life and said, better with Pepsi. And, the real insight was, hey, we may not be on the menu, but we're always in the picture. It's kind of a fun way to talk about it. And so we launched that, on National Hamburger Day with a fun offer for consumers that if people would send a picture of themselves online with a Big Mac, a Whopper, or a Dave single and a Pepsi, we'd pay for the Pepsi. And so it really prompted people to have this conversation around choice and did a very fun, clever, creative way. We brought the mascots of those companies in and had a little bit of fun with it. And so it was a really fun campaign. And, it's gotten a lot of really great accolades in the industry, which is great. And won Cannes Lions this past year. But, what I'm most excited about is really just the impact it was able to make on the business, really closing the gap of situational salience, really helping. We landed a few new burger chains because of, at the same time. And it was great. So really a lot of fun campaign, very challenger kind of campaign, had a lot of fun with that.
For sure. Yeah, no, we love that campaign. And I just wish I was a fly on the wall when that discovery of the intersection of the wrappers showing the logo, was that just like a holy shit moment?
It was it's funny. And I talked about this when I was out at Cannes with Louis Me from Alma. And it wasn't like this, oh, we just found it and saw it. It was, they had pitched this really fun idea showing that you can find the Pepsi logo in a whole bunch of different things. So we found a Pepsi logo in a Snickers bar logo. We found it in it was a pasta sauce logo and in a this and a that and all sorts of stuff. And I was like, that's interesting. And so as I had some of those discussions with R&D, I'd say, hey, let's bring the tension in and really, could we find it in burgers? And it got really tricky because McDonald's was one of their clients. And so they had to basically say, okay, and by the way, McDonald's has no blue in their logo. So how would you bring that in and you bring it to the sky? And there's all these fun executions. And then two, our legal team, and to actually make the Pepsi logo, some of it originally it would require some manipulation of the logos where you need to and make the globe a little different ways. And our legal team said, you can't go against four of the biggest IP holders in the world, Coca-Cola being the fourth one, and manipulate their logo, you will get sued. And so we said, back to the constraints, making better creative, you're basically, okay, like we're handcuffed. And we said, what if we did origami and we didn't manipulate anything? And then we just took their wrappers and folded it in the right way where it looked like a Pepsi logo. And that's what we did. And so we said better with Pepsi, it's just a circle over a folded origami wrapper that looked like the Pepsi logo. And so that's how we were able to find it and do it the right way, and off we went. So it was a lot of fun.
So cool. And talk about seeing opportunities where others might force compromise. So excellent illustration.
There you go.
Okay, we're going to move to a somewhat lightning round.
Oh boy.
So here, Todd, this is really about you as a consumer or just as an admirer of brands out there. I'd love for you to name top of mind a brand or a campaign that exhibits each of these dimensions. Okay, you ready?
Yeah, sure.
So the first one is empathy. What is a brand or a campaign that you really think shows empathy?
I'd say Dove, I think does a good job of that with their pure beauty and really understanding their consumers and not just spitting out what every competitor does, the same rinse and repeat, touched up model, and saying, hey, you don't have to look like a supermodel. You don't have to have a body like this. You don't have to do this. You still need soap. You still need lotion. You still need our stuff. We're here for you. And really celebrating that has been a real differentiator. And it really started from empathy.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. What about a brand or campaign that was really pioneering? It was sort of the first of its kind.
Maybe Tesla, an interesting brand is, I know it's like a controversial one right now, but I would say just the concept again, and it really stems less from the brand and more from the product, I guess, experience, but really taking the concept of design thinking rather than saying, hey, we have a gas car and we can also add in electricity and hybrid. It's like, what if we just reverse engineered and said we were going to build a car from scratch from gas doesn't exist.
Yep.
It's electricity based. Okay. And it's based with the web and it's got a touch screen and it's got an autopilot and cameras built in. It's not like adding things to the existing, what is a car? It's rebuild and imagine what a car is, which I thought was an interesting frame.
Absolutely. What about a brand or campaign that stands behind bold ideas, even if not well understood at the time?
I think Burger King does a great job of that. As you know, I know Fernando over there, and they always have done some great. Well, he's now not over there, but they do great stuff, and have really taken that idea of a challenger brand to the next level, and just having a lot of fun and instigating. And they know who they are, and they poke the bear and provoke and do a lot of stuff.
Yep, those are all great examples. So now just back to you. This one's called Spill Your Guts. This is all about you personally. So,
oh, geez.
What's the first brand you remember as a child?
Probably Fisher Price. It's got to be Fisher Price. I mean, all the best toys. I used to have like this little, it was called like a speak and spell, where you would like type things in and it would just say the words. And it's like educational toys, but Fisher Price, was all the toys.
Yeah. And I think that we were the first generation to really have technology be such a big part of some of our toy development as kids. So that's a good example, Fisher Price. What book or movie best represents your career journey?
It's funny. I would say it's funny. One of these, it doesn't represent my journey, but there's a movie that I remember when I was young and I watched. It was with Michael J. Fox called The Secret of My Success. And he's like running around New York with his briefcase and he's starting in the mailroom and he's making it happen. And it's like a very cliche 80s kind of, he's carrying a briefcase, wearing a suit. He's like very official, but I don't know, something with that, the hustle, the initiative of that connected with me. I don't know. I think it's just a fun movie. I wouldn't say it represents my journey at all because I have a very different journey, but I thought that was just a fun movie that I remember kind of inspired me to go into business.
Same, actually. So you stole mine. I will say, I thought that that's what being in business was. I just that, picture of the boardroom and the hustle and all that stuff. Maybe
Totally.
not, misrepresenting my identity. I don't think that's correct. Exactly where I was trying to go, but no, the hustle is certainly there.
Correct.
This one's fun for a guy that works on Pepsi, but how would you describe your job to a child?
We make fun stuff. It's very just, we do things to help make people smile at the end of the day, right? I mean, both from our product experience all the way to our marketing. And, my kids, I have 2 kids at home and they see the stuff I always show them like the work I'm doing. And, it's funny, when they were very young, they thought I like drove the Pepsi truck, and they now know better. Or when I was working on bubbly and life water. They thought I was like inventing things and doing R&D, and I'd be tasting products at home and talking about it and all this stuff. And then now on Pepsi, they think I'm like best friends with Snoop Dogg and, doing whatever. So
But
it's
aren't
a
you?
whole,
I mean, isn't that real?
it's yeah. But it's so it's one of those things that it's a fun job. And I think they like the idea of marketing. They've actually seen firsthand the breadth of a marketing job, how it goes everything from R&D to they hear me on my Zoom meetings at home with my team, all the way to some of these really cool pieces of work that we've developed and launched, and TV spots and new products. And it's fun.
Yeah. What's one piece of advice you would give a business leader that is trying to make their brand more gutsy?
I wouldn't try to make your brand more gutsy just for the sake of making it more gutsy. I think it all starts with healthy self-awareness, I would say, as a brand.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean, a lot of brands aspire to be like, I want to be gutsy, or I want to be this, or I want to be a purpose-driven brand, or I want to be whatever the buzz, I want to be in Web3, whatever it is, that's fine. But it all starts with knowing who you are as a brand, and not who you want to be, but who you are and almost how you're perceived today by the marketplace. And that's when I was started on Pepsi. One of the first things I did was, as I looked at a lot of the positioning documents before me and where the brand was, it was not really honest with itself and where it was. And why the first campaign that I launched was this thing, is Pepsi okay? Pepsi's more than okay. This concept that the most popular statement about a Pepsi was people apologizing for it in a restaurant. When you'd order a drink and the server says, "Is Pepsi okay?" And like, that's a horrible experience for your brand. We're famous for being number two in a lot of instances. And there's nothing wrong with that. We are a big, great, awesome brand, and we have to stand on our own, and there's nothing to apologize about. And so acknowledging that cultural truth and flipping it on its head. When the Super Bowl commercial, we brought in Cardi B with Okur and, Steve Carell and Lil Jon. And so things like that, as you get into advice for your brand, if you're a business leader, understand who your brand is, what you're about, and also what you're not about, so you can start from there.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Great wisdom. And what's the most used emoji on your phone?
I'd say definitely the fire emoji. I'm
Okay.
like, oh, that's fire. That's hot.
That feels
Flames.
like a Todd Kaplan
A
thing.
lot of flames.
We are compiling, and we have a great Gutsy brand playlist. You should check it out. It's pretty epic. So what song would you add to it?
Oh, geez. Just any song? I mean,
What,
I don't even know what
pumps you up? Speaking of the fire,
I don't even know what the frame needs to be, but I would say, I want to say, is it called Breaking Bad by Meek Mill and Drake? I don't know that one, but it's got a good little beat to it. I love just that.
Going bad on them anyway. Saw you last night, but didn't all day. Yeah, a lot of murk caught me in a hard way. Got a sticky and I keep it at my dog's place. Girl, I left you loving magic, not saw shade.
It's a good one, but anyhow, it's not like that song has any deep meaning or anything like that.
That's okay. That's okay. The
fun
playlist
song.
is multi-purpose. Well,
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Todd. We appreciate you so much here at GutCheck, and I have been really looking forward to this conversation, learned a lot. So appreciate you, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, Jess, it was obvious that you were not only excited for this interview, but I could see you energizing and the wheels turning in your head as you spoke to Todd.
Yeah, and I really don't want to go too fangirl here, but Todd really is an influencer in our industry, and his views on empathy, his approach to innovation, how he cares about developing his talent. Plus, I'm sorry, but he just has a cool factor to his job. Like these are all the reasons I was super excited to talk with Todd. And I may or may not have invested a little bit of time prepping for this one.
Yeah, I think you did. Now, as always, our guests have a ton of wisdom to share with us. And Todd comes from a company I think we all really look up to. So what do you think we could take away from this interview and maybe even apply to our lives or work lives?
And I truly could comment on every part of this discussion, but this is not my TED Talk. So I will try to focus on the points that I found most salient. First, we usually start with empathy, and that is embedded in Pepsi's strategy. I think it's embedded in Todd as a leader, but also in Pepsi's strategy. So Todd talked about empathetically peeling back the onion and arriving at this brand purpose of unapologetic enjoyment. And when he describes that person that claps at the end of the movie and doesn't shy away from karaoke and wears team gear in enemy territory, I mean, I get this person, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. As long as it's not the person who claps at the end of a flight. I'm just kidding. But yes, I definitely get this person. And I feel like, clapping aside, I am this person. So I aligned with that a lot.
Yeah. And, Todd's definition of agility, it's really interesting because it's about keeping your ear to the ground on culture and realizing that as the world changes, and it's changing really rapidly nowadays, that your brand point of view manifests, right? It doesn't change, it manifests to those contextual conditions. And I loved the example of the mess we missed, which sounded like a really cool campaign that I looked up afterwards. It's a perfect illustration of staying true to that unapologetic enjoyment and how that looks different within the cultural context of, a post-pandemic or mid-pandemic world when that campaign launched.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we should all be ready for those small changes or context changes. And sometimes it's really hard to pivot from, say, your roadmap if you've defined it well. But the whole point is staying very relevant to your market, and our market is alive and breathing and changing.
And I wholeheartedly agree with Todd's point of view that the time to innovate is during times of constraint or friction. So instead of cutting back, lean into brand building, lean into innovation. Like, yes, bravo. I want to play that part back to clients again and again, because it can be tempting to cut back during times of economic pressure or uncertainty. But if you lean into it, I think there's real return. And I loved his wisdom there. And then in terms of standing behind bold ideas, we talked about Web3, NFTs, and believe me, we could have gone down a few rabbit holes that I'm a newbie and I would have been so lost, just out of my depth. But, what I think we can all take away in terms of application to our business lives today is Pepsi is not just investing in those things for the sake of doing it or chasing the shiny object. They are investing there to create authentic brand experiences. And as Todd's, helping the organization kind of navigate this new territory, he talked about how you have to bring people in early, bring them in often, educate. It's fascinating to think of everything he's achieving within the Pepsi walls, but also what it's going to mean to consumer experiences and to brand experiences. And, I love that the end of that kind of conversation was about what is the real sustainable behavior around it? Again, it's not just the trend today. It's what's the sustainable behavior that Pepsi can monetize and continue to build communities around.
Right. It's not just a strong brand, but it's a lasting brand. And I think that was really cool to hear his take on that.
Mm-hmm. And, Todd has probably a dozen initiatives that he could have highlighted in terms of aligning with the characteristics of gutsy brands. And he shared quite a few today, but I do want to acknowledge that Better with Pepsi campaign. And for a few reasons, this one stands out to me. First, it's such a breakthrough case study on design. And if anyone listening has not seen this, origami factor of burger wrappers that Todd described, you have to go look it up. It is so, so cool. So in terms of a visual identity that really brings a campaign home, it's such an interesting example from that. But the other piece is that it wasn't just a campaign to get noticed or to be great design. It produced results. And he mentioned bringing in some additional restaurant chains as an outcome of that work. And the ability for these creative ideas to thread all the way through to those business results, of course, that's what it's all about, right? And so it's public knowledge that GutCheck supported some of the testing of that campaign. And so for us personally, there's nothing better to see that and to see it be such a successful campaign for Pepsi.
Oh, yeah. And we're very proud of that. And you got to love results. That's fantastic.
Yep. And I have to comment on Todd's freaking energy. He's like in a constant set of sprints is what it sounds like. And if you think about going from the Super Bowl and they have their AOP and there's just constant initiatives, something that's cooking. I can't, I don't know where he gets the energy, but it's inspiring for me to think of, a no is a request for more information. When initiatives are killed, you keep them in the back pocket. I mean, this guy is constantly running. And I just thought that was another very cool factor to hear come through in our conversation.
I'm guessing they have soda on tap, get that caffeine.
I would think so. So overall, I really think that Todd provides inspiration, wisdom on how to keep growing and leaning into your brand purpose, staying in step with cultural truths, never accepting that can't be done. I mean, if we can just keep up with a fraction of what Todd puts out there, I feel like we can keep the economy moving. So let's do it.
Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Gutsiest Brands podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. You can find Todd's song choice, Going Bad by Meek Mill featuring Drake, on the Gutsiest Brands Spotify playlist. If you like what you're hearing, please consider sharing our episode with a friend and leaving us a 5-star review. See you next time. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Gutsiest Brands podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. And if you like what you're hearing, please consider sharing our episode with a friend and leaving us a 5-star review. See you next time.